Welcome to a deck review of the Lubanko Tarot by Emily Lubanko. This deck is absolutely transformational. I will say, especially if you are a queer person with kind of Scorpio energy going on, whether that's in your chart or just, generally, somebody who likes digging into shadow work, likes digging into deep personal exploration, or actually collective liberation. I think this could be a really good deck for justice work, for sort of finding your role in the movement work, as well as for some deep, intense personal shadow work. Any of those things, would highly recommend this deck. I know it's not really proper when doing a review to just gush, but I will just say in advance now that I'm probably going to gush. This deck immediately fell into one of my top fives. I would say particularly being somebody who has all those energies mentioned before. But I will give an honest review about it, tell you a little bit about my experience working with the deck. I have decided to start doing deck reviews only after I've spent a good bit of time working with the deck and really connecting with it so that I can talk to you about some specific cards. So I will do a flip through. Cards will not be in order. I hate having to reorder my deck, so I'm just going to kind of flip through and talk about cards as I'm inspired to do so. But this is, again, by Emily Lubanko, who is an artist who's been working on these cards, as I understand it, for quite a long time, and it really does show. So here's the box. You can see it's the this style magnetic open. On the back, I really love this description: a fully illustrated 78 card tarot deck exploring the surreal, the intense, the queer, and the divine. And that is actually a really good description of what's in here. So let's just open it up and take a look. I'll give you a quick look inside of the box so you can see these swords. This is actually from the Six of Swords, this art here. And then you have this horse inside. So that's a quick look at the box, and then these are the card backs. I admittedly am not a cardstock expert, so I will just say it is a matte cardstock. I find that it shuffles well. It's not that kind of like sticky gilding that makes it difficult to shuffle, but it's a nice silver gilding. You do get a small-sized book and with it, but it's pretty thick, you can see. So it's not just like a little white book style. It's actually pretty good book. So there is an introduction, as well as a sort of how to use, and then there's a spread here, 3-card spread, and a little bit on the Fool's Journey. So for each card, you can see here, you don't get the images themselves, just text, but you do get upright and reversed meanings. So here you'll see there's a specific reversal meaning. I know some folks really like that in the cards. I haven't read this entire guidebook front to back, but I will say that what I've read has been really useful and like really inspiring as an experienced reader. I think just reading what this guidebook has to say has given me more sort of takes on the card, and a lot of times it's what I expect but sort of twisted a little bit, or like taking out a particular part of the card. So I do really find this useful. You can see the minors and the court cards are a little shorter, but it's still a upright and reversed meaning. And then in the back, I don't think, there's not anything really specific in the back, but there is an afterword there. So that's the book, but let's get into what you came here to see. So the cards. Okay, so what really stood out to me when I first started reading with this deck in general was the kind of, let me find a good example of this actually, the way the line work is, so you can see the painting, the line work pretty clearly. And what I like about this is that, here's a great example, you get a good sense of motion and movement. So I find this deck to work really well in a spread where you have cards side by side, because sometimes the movement of the brush strokes really flow into one another. And I find that to be really powerful, especially with the sword suits. You often find like this, you can feel the kind of energy coming from the blades of the swords. And I really like that. But I am going to just start flipping through these. Again, they're not in order. And I'll pause and sort of tell you about some of the cards that really resonated with me. Okay, so right off the bat, this Five of Cups. I love the framing of this. I pulled this card a number of times in my own practice. And what I really like about it is that there is this feeling of suspension, this feeling of the figure in silhouette kind of gives it a feeling of darkness, and at the same time looking out onto this turmoil of the water. Of course, the Five of Cups, a card about grief, a card that can be about really being in your emotions, and yet the figure is not swallowed by the water. And I think that's an interesting just interpretation of somebody being there in front of the spray. If you ever stood in front of a waterfall, that's the feeling I get from this. It's being with this spray, but not falling in. Although, if you got it upside down, right, you might read it as kind of falling energy. So I like that. I love the way in the Six of Cups you have the container of this kind of glass, which is an interesting way of like pulling out that childhood experience, or even that like inner child experience as part of the adult life, but held in and of itself. I will note, by the way, that again, I haven't read the guidebook cover to cover, so these are not interpretations that are coming from the artist. They're coming from me. So again, like there are some really interesting interpretations in the book, but since I haven't gone through all of them yet, I'm just going to be kind of sharing from the heart here. This star. I mean, look at this with the tree. It just feels really like a moment in time, held separate from the rest of the world. And I think that's a really cool, again, like you're not seeing necessarily in all the cards that, or in any of them really, maybe some, but mostly you're not seeing the traditional Rider-Waite-Smith imagery. And yet I do find that it's pretty accessible and readable for folks who are familiar with, who are learning or who are familiar with the Rider-Waite-Smith. There's not, if there are any renamings, there are very few, so it's mostly sticking with the traditional names. I also find the color palette really intriguing in a way that I honestly could not tell you why. You do have a fair amount of diversity in this deck, in terms of skin tone, race, ethnicity. You also get a fair number of characters like this one that are more sort of ethereal or surreal, as Emily themselves puts it on the back of the box. So this card is a favorite of mine, the Moon. So I feel like in a lot of moon cards, you get literally the moon and you get the water, but you don't always get this such a sense of like what's lurking. And I really feel like the Moon is a card that grapples with what is lurking underneath our subconscious, what is there. It can be really scary to explore, but at the same time, especially if you are queer or if you're someone else who is marginalized and feels a sense of separateness from community or from sort of normalcy, you may find a creature like this to actually be in a way inviting. It's not to pull away from the shadowiness of this, but just I do think that there's a sense of curiosity and like wanting to know more about this creature. I like the way it's half submerged and half kind of peeking out. With a lot of the traditionally gendered cards, which I don't know if folks would consider the Hierophant traditionally gendered, but I do like that it moves away from that and gives a different take. So you have this Hierophant with the many hands, holding the mask, and the face underneath. I think there's a lot you can really take from this. By the way, if anybody who's watching this is a tarot reviewer themselves, I don't know if you also feel like I do right now, a little self-conscious after Katie Flowers put out that excellent parody video about a tarot review, but I'm afraid to be like, I love this card. This card is stunning. I'm very consciously trying not to do that with this deck that I do love. This one I pulled a number of times, and I really like the way the sparing use of color and light in this card really like captures the essence and the smallness of this figure. And if you look at it closely, it looks like it could be two figures, but it also could be almost a like reflection or a separate version of this character, which is how I read it the first time it came up. It almost felt like a person who is walking through this bleak landscape and, you know, ignoring the churches in the traditional version, with the rain coming down and this like sideways rain. But it felt like the second figure was almost like could be the kind of like ego self or the burdens that we carry. This person has the sack on their back that make it difficult for us to reach out for support. So I don't know if that was the intention, but that's really the energy I get from this card. Check out that fierce Page of Wands. So this one, it definitely has kind of a kink vibe to me. There's a number of these cards that I feel like if you identify with kink or other alternative sexualities, this could be a really powerful deck for like sexuality related readings. So here, the Eight of Swords, I like how, you know, the traditional interpretation of this card, right, is that you're trapped but not really trapped. And so I love the way you have these swords coming down and then just the absolute delight in this character. I don't know if it's specifically meant to be read as like a furry or like a puppy player or something, but I kind of read it that way with the mask. So it's really cool. It's the Ace. So again, that movement here, we're like breaking through. That really gives me the sense of breaking through that comes with a new perspective that sometimes does shatter the old in a way that may not be particularly comfortable. This is the Two of Cups. So this one kind of get, it's not exactly the same when you flip it. It's a slightly different image, but I like that. It's a different way of doing the like water pulling from two cups, having the string tying the two figures. I don't even have anything to say about the tower. I just want to show it to you. Just look at that. So this is really cool. Leaping through, you have the transformation. I feel like the transformation energy of death comes through, but not without the pain and difficulty and the like drama of bursting through. I think sometimes you either have like the traditional like Grim Reaper or Skull type death card. Sometimes you have like a really negative, or not negative, but a really dramatic sort of violent death card, but you don't get that sense of transformation. And then other times you have kind of rebirth energy, but it's very soft. And so I like how this encompasses transformation and rebirth, but like it's not necessarily easy. Mermaid. Okay, this one I love. Okay, so Temperance is a card that I often look to in decks to determine whether I want the deck, because it is a personal card of a lot of meaning for me as a non-binary person, as a kind of person who is very drawn to the idea of alchemy and blending in my magic. So if you look closely, you have this dark river. You've got the traditional kind of pouring imagery, but then look at how the hair melds into the water, and then we have the tree is like part of the body of water, and then the wings. So it's like everything really joins into the same flow in a really unique way. You have different kinds of energies, wings, water, hair, all of that coming together And I just absolutely adore this. Again, I'm just going to be saying I love this, but there you go. That feeling of falling in the Eight of Cups speaks to me really deeply. Again, so you'll see kind of themes that carry through some of the cards. You may notice some similarities between this Four, the smoke coming from the chimney, and the Temperance card I just showed you. So like some of the same sort of color motifs and brush strokes give it a cohesiveness. And so that's kind of what I was talking about when I said if you have a spread and you put them side by side, it can be really interesting. The Seven of Cups. Again, a very different take on the Seven of Cups, and you can see the, there we go. So here, a very different take on balance than you normally see. And there are incorporations here of like different cultural elements. So this obviously has kind of like a yin-yang infinity feel. I will admit that I am not, I would say I'm not knowledgeable enough. Also, I am white myself. And so I can't necessarily comment to like how respectfully these things are used or aren't used, but it feels, I have definitely engaged with other decks where like that imagery really feels like it was just kind of dropped in there without a lot of knowledge, and it doesn't feel that way to me, but I'll leave it up to others to actually make that call. And you can see like in the brushwork here, so in some of the cards you get real detail in the background. All right, here, this may be my favorite. I think this is my favorite card in the deck, so let's take a look at it. This is the Ten of Wands. I really like this because I think it kind of encapsulates both the feeling of like too much. You know, there's definitely something in the Ten of Wands that's like, babe, you need to hand some of that off. But it doesn't make this figure feel like they can't handle it. Like, it feels like it's obviously really challenging. It's if you've ever tried to climb, do rock climbing and incline, you will know that is hard. And yet, they're not falling. They still have their wands. And so there's definitely a feeling of like, there's an easier way to do this. Maybe you should consider an easier way to do this. But I also feel like it's recognizing the strength and resilience of the figure. And that to me is like a new or different energy of this card. It's still climbing towards the goal, but like, hey, if somebody were to come along and like hand these off, it would not hurt, right? This is the 6 that I showed you in the inside of the box. I think it's interesting the way you have the swords coming down and they don't quite hit the boat, but they're close. And then the figure is just lying there and trusting and kind of resting. And that the 6 of Swords can be a tumultuous journey in some ways, away from a previous thought pattern. You can feel kind of a shadowy presence or reflection here. And yet this person is trusting, they're resting, and they're letting the boat carry them. So this you will recognize perhaps from the box. Boop, that is the Chariot. Again, a very different Chariot. Digging that queer haircut. I really like the feet here. This grounded, like rooted energy. You have the feet showing that. This is like a little more joyful of an interpretation of the sun than I typically like. Although you have this rearing horse, which is interesting. Maybe it's rear. Look, I don't know about horses, but it appears to be kind of rearing. So there's a little hint to like that the sun is not always necessarily an easy energy, even if it is bright. There's not a ton of body size diversity. I will note that in this deck, that a lot of the folks are on the thinner side. Not all, but at the same time, the ones that aren't are sort of the ones that often aren't. So like the Queen of Pentacles, for example. And might be one minor criticism. It's really interesting, like the way this magician has almost like a kind of devilish or like nymphish, I'm not even sure the word, but kind of feel to it. I like that. I like that it's not a very gendered magician as well. Oop. This is one of my favorite court cards, the Queen of Cups. I like the mermaid for the Queen of Cups because I feel like it is a card that says like go into your deepness of your emotions or subconscious. The kind of like pouring into the cup gives me a sense of that underwateriness, but at the same time, it's a mermaid. The mermaid can breathe underwater, so you can in fact make it. I believe this, I would assume this is Odin. That looks like Wienen was the emperor. I always like looking at the Four of Cups because I don't love interpretations that treat it as if the person is doing the wrong thing by focusing on the one cup. I mean, it is interesting that they're not looking to that cup, but I think this like gentle energy of looking away feels very intentional to me. Like you get to decide where your focus lies. Oh, I love this. So here again, you could give this a kink interpretation if you want to. Or just a general kind of embracing the wildness. But I like that it's that mask. We have masks throughout this deck. Again, they may have some specific cultural symbolism that I'm not aware of, but I just like it for what it is. Oh, the energy, this fire wing on the night. So you can see it doesn't shy away from violence or blood, but it's also not just dark. There's a lot of joy in this deck. I like the way here it's not, it's like 3 hands and then 2 hands. And there's something about that that feels like a less transactional kind of capitalist feeling of reciprocity and a more kind of giving what you can energy, or at least that's one way you could interpret that. This clarity of the eyes and the sword in the night is really cool. This may be a confronting image for some, so warning, wait 10 seconds, close your eyes if you don't want to be confronted. I am obsessed though. This is the Lovers. Whew. That is just powerful. It's interesting how sort of wild-eyed this king is. This is great. I feel like a real renewal with this. If you've ever stuck your head in a body of water when you've worked real hard, you're sweaty. I think that really captures beautifully. This may just be one giant fan queer letter, this deck, and honestly, I'm okay with that. Nine of Wands. It's kind of interesting, like, I would think of the 9. It's interesting not seeing the person holding the wands here. I'm not totally sure how to interpret that one, which is okay. Oh, we have another confronting one coming up, so this one should be okay. But Hanged, I love the underwater head, because the head is underwater, but you see that the mouth and nose are above. So they're not in crisis. And if you've ever sort of had part of your head stuck underwater and you can still breathe, it can still be kind of scary. Like, it can still feel like you're about to drown. And so I love the stillness of this, because it probably took a moment to get to, which is how the Hanged feels to me. Okay, next card. Again, 10 seconds. Cover your eyes if you don't want to see kind of confronting imagery. But this is the Devil. Pomegranate, the chains. Whew, love that card. Hermit. I like that the Hermit has constellations and sort of an astrological nod, because it definitely feels like sort of wisdom traditions, pointing to wisdom traditions. This is interesting. I don't know if I've ever seen a Fool card where there actually was another cliff that they were walking to, but they're still, you know, it's like this bridge that is kind of the trust, the invisibility, and then there's this danger below, but the figure is, as all fools, happily moving forward. And finally, it's the Two of Wands. So yeah, that's the deck. Definitely check it out. If you enjoyed this deck and you want to get it, I believe it is still for sale. If you want a reading with this deck, I have just opened my book, so please check it out. Link below. I have some very special launch rates available and can do an intuitive reading for you with this deck. Happy to delve into some of the darker aspects of life. Death, sexuality, grief, all those things are topics that I'm more than comfortable reading for you with. So, I think that could be a really good match for this deck. If you would like a reading, check it out below. And if you just want access to more content about tarot and astrology, please check out my Patreon, as this free content is supported by my patrons.